Was the Windows Phone really that bad? Let's find out. Windows Phone is a discontinued series of smartphones produced by Microsoft, which ran the Windows Mobile operating system, which had been around since the early 2000s, or late 1990s. Windows Phone was infamous for its live tiles that updated periodically. They were also known for their unique range of colors and models, particularly the Nokia Lumia series, and Windows phones were actually decent as far as stability and performance goes, even on lower-end devices of the time, and some people really liked the different approach Microsoft were taking to the mobile market, but Microsoft were in the game a bit too late. By the time Windows Phone 7 was released, the iPhone was already all the rage, and Android was quickly becoming a dominant player as well, with devices like the Google Nexus proving to the world that Android was indeed the true competitor to iOS. But Windows Phone was dominant before the iPhone. It was even more popular than the BlackBerry, but around 2013 to 2014. Windows Phone was losing market share to its competitors, and in 2017, Microsoft would announce to the world that Windows Phone would be gone for good, with no more models released after 2017, and in 2020. Microsoft killed the latest version of Windows Mobile, Windows 10 Mobile, which stopped getting support on January 14, 2020, ironically the same day Windows 7 lost extended support. What a sad time for Microsoft fanboys. Anyway, let's see what made Windows Phone such a disaster in the first place. Before 2007, Microsoft's heyday. In the early days of Windows Phone enjoyed a healthy market share of over 40%, it was more popular than the BlackBerry and Nokia's Symbian OS, but it would not be long before Microsoft's market share was put under significant threat by one of its largest rivals, Apple. Post-2007, the iPhone shocks the world, and Google quickly races to compete with their Android OS. In 2007, Apple unveiled the iPhone 2G, the first production iPhone. It shocked the world with amazement as we had never seen something like the iPhone before. It was the first phone to feature a touch screen, instead of the usual keyboards that were underneath the screens of most phones back in the day. It was very futuristic for its time and well ahead of the competition. It quickly killed off BlackBerry and Nokia, and this would threaten Microsoft's mobile market share despite the thoughts of the then CEO Steve Ballmer, who said that the iPhone was not going to be popular, and that it was not going to appeal to business markets. Well, if only he really knew what he was talking about, because in 2010, the iPhone was already the norm, and Androids were just starting to get on a competitive level, with devices like the Samsung Galaxy S1, but Windows Phone was a whole other thing of itself. Many of them had physical keyboards and trackballs as well. But after the iPhone, Microsoft quickly realized that this was going to threaten their market share, and in an attempt to keep their mobile market share fairly big, they released several touch-screen Windows mobile phones in 2010, which ran Windows Phone 7, but even with this, Microsoft stood no chance against the competition, with many manufacturers opting to use Android as it was much cheaper in terms of licensing and installation of the operating system. Microsoft forced manufacturers to pay to use their proprietary Windows Mobile OS, which led many, aside from Nokia and a few others, largely abandoning Windows phones altogether, which helped Windows Phone lose even more market share. 2012 to 2015, the disastrous years of Windows Phone. After the iPhone 5 was released, and the Samsung Galaxy S3 was flying off the shelves like hotcakes, Microsoft knew it would be hard to gain back what they once had. The Windows Phone was already on thin ice as many developers did not devote their resources to porting over existing apps, as Windows Phone was not seen as a profitable market. Therefore, many apps, including Google Apps, social media, etc., are not available on any Windows Phone, and despite the ability to sideload apps, this is rather complex and not as simple as you would think. Windows phones are not meant to run apps outside the Windows Store, kinda similar to the iPhone, so it makes sideloading much more difficult, and since many apps do not exist in the first place, I doubt there are any good, or were any good, equivalent apps that could replace the mainstream counterparts. Microsoft later purchased Nokia because they were struggling to find a manufacturer to make their phones. HTC was also one of the remaining makers of Windows phones up until about 2015 or 2016, but the good majority of new Windows phones after 2010 would be Nokia Lumia phones. Famous models include the Nokia Lumia 1020, released in 2013, which has a 41-megapixel camera. Then there's the Lumia 950, released in 2015, which was a premium Lumia phone, and then there's the Lumia 640, a cheap smartphone from 2015 that is surprisingly good for a cheap phone, compared to cheap Androids of the time, which ran like absolute crap. Windows phones were not exactly speedy, but the animations and overall niceness of the operating system hid away any slowdowns or slowness it had, so even on a Windows phone with 1 GB of RAM, it would run like a champ compared to stock Android with the exact same specifications, which was a major selling point of Windows phones as well. But it was not enough to save Microsoft from throwing them in the graveyard in 2017, and it costed Microsoft over $7 billion, or around $7 billion, which will go down in history as one of Microsoft's worst ever product failures. The only real reason Windows Phone was dead was because nobody was actively making apps for it, and had of people taken the opportunity to make Windows Phone a third major player in the phone market, it certainly would have been interesting to see where Windows Phone would have gone, had Microsoft not killed it and fucked up the whole thing in the first place. It all came down to Steve Ballmer's initial reactions, and the fact that Microsoft was too slow to catch up with the iPhone. If Microsoft had invented what we now know as the smartphone, it could have really helped them be a major player in the mobile industry. But history will not change, and we will forever remember the legacy of Windows Phone and how bad everyone thought it was, when in reality, it was a decent OS. It's just that nobody wanted to bother making apps for it, which made using Windows Phone a lot more difficult, especially if you needed certain apps from an ecosystem. But there were some things about Windows phones that made them superior, one of the biggest being Microsoft Office Mobile, which back at the time, was not on Android and iOS, so people who wanted to take Office on their phones would buy a Windows Phone, and if you had special models, you could kind of turn your Windows Phone into a PC, except it wasn't really a PC. It really just extended the screen of Windows Mobile to the desktop to reflect a Windows desktop-like experience. But what really made Windows Phone different was the overall UI and live tiles that it had. With more colorful phones and tiles, it really was trying to be something else. But sadly, we will never see anything like that ever again, and I think it's so unfortunate Windows Phone was short-lived. It could have had potential to become a big player. But of course, Microsoft gonna do what Microsoft gonna do, and they always somehow manage to fuck things up. I don't know how or why, but it always seems to be a regular occurrence at the Microsoft office. Oh sir, I had a fuck up today. Now we have to cancel our biggest line of smartphones, and ruin Nokia's reputation. Too bad it will cost us $7 billion, but we have trillions of dollars. It won't affect us, we can afford to chuck aside this debt. And let's pretend like Windows Phone never existed. Yeah, we'll never forget the Windows Phone. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next video. Bye for now.